All righty. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday morning mastermind here. Today, we're going to be going over inspections, and we're actually going to do more of a general overview of this. I'm not going to go line by line through the contract. Kong is actually going over these pages at 2 o'clock today in our forms training. So we'll dive in deep during that session. But again, we'll speak to some generalities of this and then timelines and also the forms that typically get used in negotiation throughout this process. So to kick it off, we're going to start here on page 6 of the agreement of sale. I just wanted to point out that at 2 places within this inspection portion of the contract, it notes that if the buyer doesn't act, it's a waiver of that contingency and the buyer accepts the property in the present condition and releases in paragraph 28 of this agreement. So again, you got to, the buyer needs to act or else they're accepting the property the way it is. So we've really got to pay attention to deadlines and timeframes within this portion of the agreement. Scrolling down here, I wanted to speak to some of these notices right at the top. Buyer's due diligence and inspections, rights and responsibilities. Number 1, seller will provide access to insurers, representatives, and as may be required by this agreement or by mortgage lenders, to surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, and inspectors. In addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensees may attend any inspection. So that's important. That's also going to be involved in a scenario that I want to go through at the end of this, but I also wanted to point out that just the parties and their licensees, not family members, grandparents, parents, friends of friends, only people in the contract, the inspectors and their licensees may attend inspections. Number 2 here, buyer may make 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property for limited purpose of determining the condition of the property, in making sure that it's in the required condition of this agreement and any addenda. So we've seen this and we've seen people try to exploit this as a loophole in competing offer situations and bring an inspector along with them during these. But this is not to be, it's pretty clear to me, it's limited purpose of determining that the property's in the same condition that you looked at it when you entered into the agreement of sale. Scooting down here, the seller has the right upon request to receive a free copy of any inspection report from the party whom it was prepared. So they are entitled to any reports. Buyers cannot withhold those reports from the seller. However, seller does not have the right to receive a copy of any lender's appraisal report. So it does distinguish between the two and says that you can't have the appraisal report if you are the seller. So getting down here into our selections, obviously this is going to depend on a few things. One, the property, obviously, whether it's a home with its own septic system and well for water, that's the biggest one. And then also buyers' preferences, whether they, want to have chickens or park an RV outside the house. That's going to determine what type of inspections that you're going to choose on this form. In addition, it depends on a multiple offer situation. Obviously, less is better in those types of scenarios. But starting here at the top, whole home inspection, this pertains to just about everything. And I also wanted to point out, it also includes any other items the buyer may select. This is very all-encompassing, in my opinion. And like I spoke to before, we're going to dive deeper into this, I'm sure, in Kong's 2 p.m. training on the forms. Wood and termite infestation. This is for wood destroying insects. This also may be required by certain types of loans, VA in particular, and PHFA. Deed restrictions in zoning. This pertains to more of the stuff that I was talking about having animals or chickens or wanting to do certain things with the property that are in regards to zoning ordinances. Water service, this is if you have a well at the property and you want to have the water tested. Radon, everybody should be pretty familiar with radon at this point. On-lot sewage, first on-lot sewage disposal systems. Property and flood insurance, you see a lot of times as a catch-all, people put that in there so that it gives them a little bit of time and they don't have to necessarily do an inspection. They can just pull a property insurance quote and use that as a means of getting out of the contract. Property boundaries, if folks want to have a survey or a title abstractor do a survey of the property. And lead-based paint for properties built before 1978. So again, these selections are going to depend on the property, the buyer's preferences, and whether you're in a multiple offer situation. But your selections are also going to dictate your timeframes within this contingency period. The preprint in standard for the contingency period is 10 days. Now, back in the day where home inspectors were extremely busy, sometimes that didn't give you enough time to get those inspections scheduled and completed and have a report back. So my standard back in a normal market, I would write in there 15 days. Nowadays, obviously the market is completely different. It is starting to shift, and that's why we're talking about these home inspections and in contingency periods, is because they're coming back more so into play. You probably can get most inspections done in 10 days. Now, if you have a septic inspection, you're probably going to want to push that out to about 20-something days so that you have plenty of time to coordinate not only the inspection, but the pumping to be done. So just so everyone's clear on how to count these days, if we were to go under contract, everybody signs off here today, November 1st. My quick little cheat sheet, I'm going to pull up my calendar here and show you all what I typically do. I come over here to my calendar, and let's say it's 10 days. Day one starts with the 2nd. So if you just come down here to the 8th, drop down one, that's 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, getting back to it again, that's my little cheat, easy way, quick reference to putting in a date and keeping things organized within your calendar. Reading down through here, I wanted to point out it's a common misunderstanding that once you perform a buyer's reply to inspection, that automatically kicks in the 5-day negotiation period. But if you read this sentence in its entirety, it's following the end of the contingency period. So after that 10th day, the 5 days kick in. You have a 5-day negotiation period and then an additional 2-day following the end of the negotiating period. So in total, pre-printed standard, it's 17 days to work out some type of arrangement between the buyer and the seller. So again, it's very important to keep these timeframes in mind while you're negotiating, because if the buyer does not act, they are accepting the property in its condition and are moving forward. So during the contingency period, what's supposed to be used here is the buyer's reply to inspection form. We will go down through this one here line by line. It's the buyer's reply to inspection reports or written corrective proposal. This is not to be used as an addendum to the agreement of sale. This form's to be used for negotiation purposes according to paragraph 13B of the agreement of sale. This form's not an addendum and should not be signed by the seller or attached to the agreement of sale. So you use this in reply to the following inspections and reports only. They bold only here because you, throughout that contingency period, can respond to individual reports if you so choose. More often than not, most agents wait as long as they're within their dates, to respond to all inspections that they have done at one given time. So you would come down here, check off all the inspection contingencies that pertain to your response. And the buyer has the right to accept the property in the present condition, a written corrective proposal in response to attached reports, and then corrections, repairs, seller's assist, or an adjustment of the purchase price. So in this section for corrections and repairs, it's very important to be specific and well-defined. Reference the home inspection reports are my recommendations. Go through line by line and use the verbiage that the expert uses in corrections and identify that the work's to be done by a licensed qualified professional and it's not a friend of a friend, relative, or such. I find it good practice to use the change in terms addendum. It says that this is, again, not to be signed by the seller. This is only to be signed by the buyer as a means of negotiation. But when I prepare these, I put together a change in terms addendum for two reasons. One, it gives me control of the verbiage of the repairs going into it. And then also it gives an easier means of negotiation. The seller can simply sign off on that while they're reading over the buyer's reply to inspection. At this point, I want to ask Kong, are there any important items that I glossed over that you want to bring up and kind of mention?
Yeah, Brooks, can you pull up the contract again to the negotiation period, the 10, 5, and 2?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering to myself, and maybe we'll go over again later at 2 p.m., but can the buyer send a termination during the negotiation period? See, let's look at the 5 there, okay? 5 days for a negotiation period. 1, seller will acknowledge in writing seller's agreement to satisfy the terms, or 2, buyer and seller will negotiate another mutually acceptable written agreement. So if that 5 days, you can't come to an agreement, then after that, the 2 days, the buyer can terminate. So let's be aware of that. You cannot terminate during the 5 days, right?
Yes, by the contract, it doesn't give any means for the buyer to terminate during that 5-day period.
Right. If you can't come to an agreement and doesn't look like it, make the seller do it during that time. That's just something I caught that I don't think I've ever mentioned in class before.
Sure.
I think we need to do a Zoom call with Goldsmith or Brett and go over some of these things. Kong, if you remember, Brooks, if you scroll to where it says who is acceptable to be a inspector, John Shannon and I had a situation a while back. John, are you on the call?
Yeah, Tim, I'm on.
And it was what the inspector was like a municipality inspector, or what was it? Or the guy was some sort of inspector, but we weren't sure that he was part of whatever this organization is. Because if we read it in its entirety to us, Brooks, about who's qualified to do an inspection.
I'm trying to find the exact point in here.
I think it's at the end of that.
12B there, Brooks.
Okay. Buyer waives or elects at buyer's expense to have the following inspections, certifications, and investigations referred to as inspection or inspections performed by professional contractors, home inspectors, engineers, architects, and any other properly licensed or otherwise qualified professionals. All inspections shall be non-invasive unless otherwise agreed in writing. If the same inspector is inspecting more than one system, the inspector must comply with the home inspection law. See paragraph 12D for notices regarding property and environmental inspections.
But it says, do you remember where it was, John? If you go down to 12D once.
No, it's actually, Tim, it's in the home inspection section.
Yeah,
Okay.
If you read that part, scroll up,
Right.
Brooks, to that first election.
You know what I'm talking about, Kong, where it says,
Yeah, see there, right there, it says, right in the middle, buyer may select, if buyer elects to have a home inspection of the property as defined in the home inspection law, the home inspection must be performed by a full member in good standing of a National Home Inspection Association or a person supervised by a full member of a National Home Inspection Association in accordance with the ethical standards and code of conduct or practice that association, or by a properly licensed or registered engineer or architect.
so to me, that whole thing contradicted the above paragraph, because it said they needed to be by a full member in good standing of a National Home Inspection Association. But up above, it says that, where was that?
Yeah.
And that buyer, it can be performed by a professional contractor, home inspectors, engineers, architects, and any other licensed or qualified professional.
Well, I think, Tim, after reading that now again, that part B there that Brooks has highlighted is just a general statement pertaining to the elections below.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to have a home inspector that's licensed to do, or an engineer to pump out the septic for you to inspect it. It's just a general broad statement. And then once you get into the actual election, it gets more specific who can and can't do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
so are you saying, Kong, then that if it's specifically a home inspection, it has to be a member in good standing of the National Home Inspection Association?
Yes.
Yes.
For the buyer. Yep.
Okay, because this fella was actually a codes enforcement officer for
Sure.
Carlisle Borough. And his standards, he was licensed with the state, and his standards were, in my opinion, higher than any home inspector was.
Uh-huh.
Not a member in good standing of this National Home Inspection Association.
You said he was like a zoning officer.
A codes enforcement officer, yeah.
But he
Okay.
was licensed with the state. And,
Yeah.
and what John's saying is he was more qualified than any home inspector,
Right.
but he wasn't part of this home inspection association.
Right.
And he was able to provide a written home inspection that even rating it was far and above what you get from a standard home inspector.
Sure. I guess
So
it
the
just all
question-
depends on if the buyer wants to have it done and the seller's allowing it, and he's able to give a nice report that everybody can get a copy of that can agree upon, unless the seller calls him out, hey, this guy's not a certified home inspector,
Right.
you know.
And that was my
Then-
concern going
Then,
into it.
yeah, then you're caught.
Right.
then you're caught with 1 day to do a inspection and reply.
Yeah.
But that was our question, because,
Right.
you know, in the above paragraph, it said anybody qualified, but then in the inspection of the home, it said about the association. So,
Right.
Kara's got a question down there.
Hey,
And
guys,
Go
wouldn't
ahead.
that be covered on that sheet that we have at first, where we put in the names of the inspection and have the buyer and the seller sign as part of the offer? If they've signed, if the seller has signed off of that.
It's actually a very good point, Kara. Yeah. If you can
meaning,
agree upon that.
Kara's saying then that the seller at that point has agreed to that inspector.
Right?
Yeah.
They've seen it, they've signed it, they're okay with it.
Kara's referring to our in-house inspection form authorization.
Mhm.
And then another issue, Kong and Brooks, that has been coming up recently, we've had this for years, is that if you go to, Brooks doesn't have it up right now, but if you go to the seller's property disclosure and you read, it's number 22D2. It says, after completing this form, if the seller becomes aware of additional information about this property, including through inspection reports from a buyer, the seller must update the property disclosure statement and or attach the inspection report. Okay. We just had this problem last weekend where somebody terminated and they sent our agent a copy of the inspection report. Now we're in possession of it. We have the knowledge of it. The seller says to our agent, do not send me that report, which we obliged, and we didn't send it. Our problem was, how can we be in possession of this report and have knowledge and not disclose? The seller didn't want us to disclose this report. I told the agent they got to give the listing back, because if we're in possession of it and we have knowledge of it and we're not telling the next buyer or the next agent that we're in possession of this report, we're the ones that are going to get in trouble.
Consumer notice.
So the seller refused to accept a copy of that report. So they turned around and listed it with somebody else.
Right.
But
I would
just
send it to
like-
that list agent
I
then.
would like to get a legal opinion on that
Yeah.
as these other issues. If we do one of these calls with an attorney, or if one of our quarterly sessions we're going to do in 2023 includes
You
doing a
don't
meeting.
need a legal opinion. You were absolutely right in giving that listing back.
I know, but I'd just like to see what they say, you know,
Sure.
about that and the other
It's
situation about
definitely,
being part of the, whether or not our form or Kara's thing is sufficient to not be part of that association. You know, these are just a couple gray areas that I think we got to be cautious of, because we're now going to be getting back into these inspections on a regular basis.
and the consumer notice does state that our due diligence is revealing known material defects.
Mhm.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Jim.
I might be splitting hairs here. I'm just curious. And so the seller didn't want to accept it. You're saying that they wouldn't allow you to upload a copy of it to the MLS, or they just didn't want to look at it? Because I've dealt with people that they just get frustrated with those kind of things, but we disclose it, we put it up and we're okay, but maybe they just don't want to look at it personally or read it because it just frustrates them. I guess I'm splitting hairs. I was just curious.
The seller didn't want to have any knowledge of anything that was wrong with the property. He had bought the
Okay.
property, he improved it, he was flipping it. an inspector came in, revealed what major concerns there were, and the seller said, I don't want to know.
Right. He didn't want you to put it on the MLS either.
He
then, correct?
refused to allow us to send it to him or put it on the MLS.
Okay, got you. Okay.
So I said to the agent, then we have to give the listing back, because we'll end up getting sued over that deal.
Makes sense.
John
There-
Hogan,
Yeah, thanks a lot. I just wanted to say something. I actually think it's kind of disrespectful when the other agent does send the whole report. Whether they stay in it and they just want the seller to fix the items, just send the items. And I think especially when they walk from a transaction, that agent knows that they didn't walk from the whole entire report. So I just personally, I think out of respect for the listing agent, you should only send what they're walking from or what they're asking for. There's no need to send the whole report. And I find that sometimes agents are just lazy to print out those 1 or 2 pages of the home inspection and just scan and send that to the agent. So they send the whole entire thing. But out of respect for the listing agent, whether your buyer's just asking for items to be taken care of and staying in the game, or whether they're walking, I don't think it's necessary to send the whole report. And I actually get frustrated. I've been in that situation where agents have sent the whole report. And then, like you said, Tim, you're obligated to handle it the way that you handled it. And, now you know it, whether the sellers want to know it or not. And I just think it comes down to respect for the other agent. And that's what frustrates me the most.
Even if the agent sent the summary report of just, the specific items, but not the entire report, we'd still have to disclose. The only way we would have been clear in this case is if the agent would have just sent the termination and not the report at all. Because the seller's entitled to a report, but he doesn't have to have one, and he said that he didn't want one. But when the agent sent the report to our agent, now we're in trouble. Okay. So if the agent would have just simply inspected the property with the buyer, sent the termination, then we could have put it back on the market, because we wouldn't have been in possession or known anything. Now, what I just learned today from Kong was, what if you're telling me that within the 10-day period, if the agent goes out, does the inspection report, are they not allowed to terminate then within the 10-day period? You got to go through the 10-day period and the 5-day period in order to be able to terminate, or you just can't terminate during the 5-day period?
Correct. Just not during the 5-day period. In
But
the
during
first
the
10
inspection-
days, it gives you the 3 options.
Okay. So it's only after you get to day 11 through 15 that you're not allowed to terminate until you work out a mutual agreement.
Yeah, so
negotiation period.
Somebody's
Or
got their
2.
hands up. Who's got their hand up?
Kyra,
Kyra.
Hey, just quick question. Can we revisit where it says about the report distribution? Does it say that it has to be distributed, or it may be distributed, or do you know what I
think-
mean? Up
yeah, I think
above?
it's-
who's entitled to a copy of the
Yeah,
report?
I think it says seller is entitled to a free copy.
yes, seller has the right upon request
request.
to receive a free copy of the inspection report.
Okay, good. Thank you.
That's what I'm saying, that he doesn't have to accept it. He has the right upon request. So if we wouldn't have been in receipt of that thing, we could have put the property back on the market. But in my opinion, when we received a copy of it, that's where we were in trouble.
Tim,
Mhm.
Sheila was a dual agent.
The truth. So in that situation, she would have been screwed either way.
Right.
That's tough, yeah. That last paragraph that we just pointed out for Kyra too is very important, because you'll get some of these sellers sometimes that feel that they undersold the house and they want to see a copy of the appraisal. That's where it states that they're not entitled to it.
Yeah, so I forgot about that she was a dual agent too, so that makes it even worse.
Well, one thing to note too, Brooks, if you can scroll to like that section about zoning and deed restrictions and stuff like that. So we're getting a lot of people that want to do Airbnb, short-term rentals, and they want to change the zoning to short-term rentals. And you elect this deed restrictions and zoning and give the typical 10 days to do it. So this deed restrictions and zoning, it allows you to investigate what the usage is, meaning you can go to the township or borough and say, hey, this is the address. What can I use it for? Okay. And they'll say, well, it's for residential only and maybe an attorney's office, but no short-term rentals. Okay. So at that point, then you need to terminate the deal. You can't, electing this contingency doesn't allow you to wait around to get it changed. Okay. If you want it to go from residential to, let's say, for usage of short-term rentals, there is another form actually for that to change the zoning, which is why it says at the very end there, buyer may verify that the present use of the property is permitted and may elect to make the agreement contingent upon an anticipated use. So there is an actual form to change the anticipated use. Okay.
That could potentially take a long time, couldn't it, Con?
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
just did one for short-term rental, and it took about 75 days.
Yeah.
Nobody in this market would do that. It's only if market would be very slow and your hopes of selling would be slim to none.
Yeah.
So there is one other scenario I wanted to point out, and Kong and I kind of discussed this last week because I had somebody come to me. So I'll lay out the details and you guys can tell me what you think. So in this scenario, the buyer was purchasing the house and they waived all their inspection contingencies. However, they were going through and getting a PFA or PHFA loan, which required a wood destroying insect report. The seller was refusing to allow the wood destroying insect inspector into the home. Do they have rights to do that?
What if they sign the contract?
And the mortgage contingency was waived, right, Brooks?
Yeah, so that's the additional detail I was going to go into if depending on what you guys said on that one. So they waive their rights. However, it specifically says here, number one, and this is regardless of what you elect here, the seller will provide access to insurers, representatives, and as may be required by this agreement or mortgage lenders to surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, and inspectors. So in this case, it was a wood destroying insect inspector to give them a clear report. So my thought on this was, because if you actually scroll back up to the mortgage contingency section, just because you're waiving this, the buyer may obtain mortgage financing and they have the right to go through that process. Because they have the right to obtain a mortgage, that mortgage required them to have a wood destroying insect report. Therefore, they still, by this contract, should allow that inspector to go through the house.
Scroll
That
up
was-
one more page, Brooks, wants to.
Yep.
Yeah. Irregardless of if they accept or waive, there's a 4-item to-do list. I think it's section A there. Yeah, 8, A3, seller will provide access to insurers' representatives and as may be required by mortgage lenders to surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, and inspectors.
Mhm.
So,
So just
The
keep
only
that in
part,
mind.
the only part of the buyer's financing that waives is the deposit, basically, is at risk. So if they would have backed out, then they could have lost their deposit, but in my opinion, the seller should have allowed the termite inspection to take place.
Exactly. Yeah.
well, if the seller doesn't allow it and the buyer can't come to the table with money because he didn't allow it, at settlement, they get their deposit money back, the buyer.
I would agree with that.
So don't wait, don't terminate as the buyer. Just let it ride out.
Anybody else have any other scenarios or issues or situations that they're currently dealing with they want to bring up?
Yeah, just have a question. Is there ever a situation where you can refuse to share the inspector with the seller? Example, if you're dealing with the FSBO and he's not represented by an agent, can you refuse to share that report with them?
The agreement says that the seller, upon request, is entitled to a free copy. It doesn't say it doesn't say he's only entitled to that if he's represented. It says that he's entitled to it.
Yeah, as long as
if
you use the
requested.
form. John Shannon, hands up.
Yes, I got a question back to receiving a copy of that home inspection. I know years ago that used to be a big thing, and I do agree. I think sometimes it's kind of an underhanded move to send that to the listing agent when it's not necessary. And I've done it a few times myself. Tell the buyer's agent, listen, you guys can have whatever inspection you want to have. We don't care. But we don't need to see a copy of that inspection report either. We don't want to know. That's for your own personal edification moving forward in this contract. Is that proper or not to go about that way?
I think so.
Sure,
It's okay.
laying it out before you go through the whole process.
Set the expectation right up front. You do it for your buyer, we don't want to know.
Right.
Okay.
Well, guys, I think that that was some very valuable information this morning. Anybody else have any questions?
Kyra has her hand up over there.
Go Kyra.
Yeah.
No, that might have just been from before. Sorry.
Oh.
Do I have to, oh, lower hand? I'm lowering hand.
I think I learned something new today, that 5-day, I didn't see anything that the buyer can back out during that time, terminate. I never even thought of that.
It would kind of be rare, right? Because they would have had that option within the 10 days, and the
Right.
5 days is more for the seller to consider what, the buyer put forth within that 10 days. But it is a valid point because, you want to abide by those dates and not do anything that would put your buyer's deposit in jeopardy. So that was a good point to bring up. Obviously, this stuff's complicated. If you guys ever have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to any of us, and we'll all put our heads together and help you work through it.
Okay,
2 p.m. We'll go over this thing again in depth too, so line by line.
Again, great call, guys. I appreciate it. Valuable
Yes.
information. Dad, anything you want to say?
No, the information was very precise and, as you can readily see, there's many interpretations to this contract. So just be careful when you do have questions, please pick up the phone and call us. And as Tim and Brooks and Kong just said, we'll put our heads together and find the best solution. because there is none. If you were listening to Jim Goldsmith at this point, he'd say it depends. And it always will depend on the circumstances.
Okay,
But for me, have a great week.
yep, sounds good. Thanks, everybody. See you.
Alrighty.
Joe.
See you guys.